Zeftar had done this job for 300 years. He knew how to talk to new species. He knew how to make them feel safe when they first met the Galactic Federation. Most aliens were scared or excited when they saw his ship. Some cried. Some fainted. Some tried to attack. But humans were different. The human ship came close to his vessel slowly. Zeftar watched through the big window of his command room. The human ship looked rough and simple compared to Federation ships. It had thick metal plates and big engines that burned bright blue fire. But something about it made Zeftar feel uneasy. Maybe it was how the ship moved like a hunting animal. Captain Jake Morris was the first human to step onto Zeftar's ship. He was tall with short brown hair and calm blue eyes. He did not look around in wonder like other species did. Instead, he looked at everything like he was making a map in his head. He asked questions about the ship's engines and weapons. He said they were for his report, but Zeftar noticed Morris paid special attention to weak spots. The human group was small. Dr. Lisa Wright was a thin woman with long red hair who studied alien life. She asked many questions about Kalani bodies and how they worked. She wanted to know about their blood and bones and what could hurt them. She said it was for medical help, but her questions felt wrong somehow. Colonel Pete Barnes was a big man with gray hair and scars on his hands. He had been a soldier for many years. Zeftar had met warriors from other species before. They were usually loud and tried to show how strong they were. Barnes was quiet and watched everything. His eyes moved like he was always looking for danger or ways to fight. The humans walked through the ship like they owned it. They touched things they should not touch. They looked at screens they should not see. When Zeftar told them to stop, they said sorry, but their eyes showed they were not sorry at all. They were learning, and they did not care about rules. At dinner, Zeftar tried to explain Federation law. He told them about peace and working together. The humans nodded and asked good questions. But then Admiral Susan Blake started talking about Earth's wars. She called them small problems between countries. Zeftar had read the reports. These small problems had killed 50 million humans in 100 years. What scared Zeftar was how Blake talked about killing. She spoke about dead soldiers like they were numbers in a book. She talked about burned cities like they were weather reports. Other species felt sad or angry when they talked about war. Humans talked about it like it was a job they had to do. Doctor. Wright asked about Kalani weak spots again. She wanted to know what temperatures could hurt them. She asked about their food and what poisons might kill them. She smiled when she asked these questions. Zeftar started to feel sick. Morris showed Zeftar pictures of Earth. The planet looked beautiful with blue oceans and white clouds. But Morris also showed pictures of human cities. They were huge and covered the land like metal diseases. Morris said humans had changed their whole planet in just a few thousand years. Most species took millions of years to do that. The humans asked to see Federation technology. Zeftar showed them basic things like food makers and simple computers. The humans looked at everything very carefully. They asked how it worked and what made it break. Barnes asked about the ship's weapons. Morris asked about the engines. Wright asked about the life support systems. That night, Zeftar found Colonel Barnes in a part of the ship where humans should not go. Barnes said he was lost, but Zeftar knew he was lying. Barnes had been looking at the ship's defense systems. His eyes had that same hunting look that Morris had. The next day, the humans were ready to leave. They thanked Zeftar for his kindness. They said they looked forward to joining the Federation. They signed papers and made promises. But Zeftar noticed they had small devices with them that had not been there before. They had taken things from his ship. Admiral Blake shook Zeftar's hand before leaving. Her grip was strong and her smile was cold. She said humans were good at learning new things. She said they learned very fast when they needed to. Something in her voice made Zeftar's skin crawl. After the humans left, Zeftar checked his ship. Small things were missing. A piece of the computer, part of a weapon, bits of the engine. The humans had been very careful. They only took things that would not be missed right away. But Zeftar knew what they had done. He sent his report to Federation Command. He said the humans seemed friendly, but were very interested in technology and weapons. He said they learned fast and asked strange questions. He said they might be dangerous, but he was not sure why. The Federation leaders read his report and laughed. They said Zeftar was getting old and seeing problems where there were none. They said humans were just curious like all young species. They planned to welcome humans into the Federation in 6 months. Zeftar went home to his planet feeling worried. He had met many species in his long life. He knew the difference between curiosity and hunger. The humans had looked at his ship, like hungry animals looking at food. They had touched his technology like they already owned it. But the thing that scared him most was how normal they seemed. They did not look like monsters or killers. They looked like any other intelligent species. They smiled and talked and made jokes, but under their friendly faces was something cold and calculating, something that saw everything as either useful or dangerous. 6 months later, the humans would return for their formal welcome into the Federation. Zeftar hoped he was wrong about them. He hoped his fear was just the worry of an old diplomat who had seen too much. But deep in his heart, he knew the truth. The humans had not come to join the Federation. They had come to study it. And soon everyone would learn what humans did with their studies. 3 years had passed since the humans joined the Federation. Zeftar thought maybe his fears had been wrong. The humans seemed to follow Federation rules. They shared some technology and helped with trade routes. But then the Zekhai Empire attacked, and everything changed. The Zekhai were giant insects that walked on 2 legs. They had black shells and sharp claws. They thought all other life was weak and should die. Their ships were fast, and their weapons were strong. They had destroyed 12 Federation worlds before anyone could stop them. Zeftar was at Federation Command when the war started. He watched the big screens that showed space battles. Federation ships tried to fight, but they were too slow. They tried to talk, but the Zekhai only wanted to kill. World after world fell to the insect armies. Then the human ships arrived. The first thing Zeftar noticed was how different human ships looked now. 3 years ago, they had been simple and rough. Now they were covered in weapons and armor. They moved faster than any Federation ship, and they did not wait for orders. Captain Ryan Torres commanded a ship called the Liberty. When the Zekhai attacked the Proxima system, Torres got orders to fall back and defend. Instead, he flew his ship straight at the biggest enemy ship. Zeftar watched in horror as the Liberty crashed into the Zekhai dreadnought at full speed. Both ships exploded in a ball of fire and light. 800 humans died in seconds. But the explosion opened a hole in the enemy formation. Smaller human ships flew through the gap and destroyed 6 more enemy ships. Torres had traded his crew's lives for a tactical advantage, and it worked. The Federation commanders were shocked. They said Torres was crazy. They said no sane being would waste so many lives for so little gain. But the humans just made notes about how to do it better next time. The real horror started at Kepler Station. Kepler Station was a big space station that made ships for the Federation. It had thick walls and strong shields. When the Zekhai attacked, it should have been safe. But there were too many enemy ships. The station's shields failed, and Zekhai soldiers landed inside. Most of the people on the station ran to escape ships. But 200 human Marines stayed behind. They said someone had to slow down the enemy. Sergeant Amy Rodriguez was their leader. She was a small woman with dark hair and cold eyes. Zeftar watched the battle through security cameras inside the station. At first, the humans fought like normal soldiers. They used guns and explosives to kill Zekhai warriors. But when they started losing, Rodriguez changed tactics. She told her Marines to split up and hide in different parts of the station. Then they started using the station itself as a weapon. They opened airlocks to suck HFY into space. They turned off the gravity in some areas to confuse the enemy. They poisoned the water supply in sections where HFY were gathering. The HFY were good fighters, but they did not understand the station's systems. The humans knew every pipe and wire and computer. They used this knowledge to kill their enemies in horrible ways. Rodriguez found the main computer and changed the life support systems. She made some areas very hot and others very cold. She filled rooms with poisonous gas from the shipbuilding factories. She turned the artificial gravity up so high that HFY bodies were crushed against the floor. But the worst thing happened in the food production area. The humans captured some HFY alive and learned how their bodies worked. Then they changed the plants in the growing rooms to make poison that only hurt HFY. When hungry enemy soldiers ate the food, they died slowly and in pain. The battle lasted 3 weeks. Every day, fewer human voices answered on the radio. Every day, the HFY controlled more of the station, but every day the humans found new ways to hurt their enemies. In the second week, Rodriguez lost her left arm to a HFY claw. She used medical tools to stop the bleeding and kept fighting. Private Joe Martinez was blinded by an explosion, but he still helped set traps. Corporal Nancy Kim broke both legs in a fall, but crawled through air vents to plant bombs. The humans never gave up. Even when they were dying, they kept fighting. Even when they knew they could not win, they kept killing enemies. They left messages written in HFY blood on the walls. The messages had coordinates for Federation supply bases and lists of enemy ship weaknesses. On the last day, only 12 humans were still alive. They were trapped in the station's power core room with no way out. Hundreds of HFY soldiers surrounded them. Rodriguez sent one final radio message to Federation Command. She did not ask for help. She did not say goodbye to her family. Instead, she gave a detailed report about HFY armor weaknesses and told Command which human weapons worked best against insect bodies. Then she and her remaining Marines rigged the power core to explode. The explosion destroyed the central part of Kepler Station. It killed the 12 humans and over 1,000 HFY soldiers. But before they died, the humans had gathered months' worth of intelligence about their enemies. They had learned how HFY ships worked and where their weak spots were. They had figured out what foods and chemicals could poison them. When Federation forces finally retook the station, they found rooms full of dead HFY. They found detailed notes about enemy tactics and weapons. They found maps showing the best ways to kill different types of HFY soldiers. The humans had spent their last weeks studying their enemies like scientists studying insects. The Federation commanders called it a noble sacrifice. They said the Marines had died as heroes. But Zeftar saw something else. The humans had not just died fighting. They had turned their deaths into weapons. They had made sure their knowledge would help. Kill more enemies later. Other species fought to survive. Other species died with honor. But humans fought to make sure their enemies paid the highest possible price for victory. They did not just accept death. They planned for it. They used it. Watching those security recordings changed something in Zeftar's mind. He realized the humans were not like other species. They did not see death as the end of the fight. They saw it as another tool to use against their enemies. The HFY had won the battle for Kepler Station, but they had learned to fear human Marines. Word spread through their fleet about the horrors they had found inside the station. Some HFY soldiers refused to board human ships or stations. Others had nightmares about poisoned food and crushing gravity. Rodriguez and her Marines were dead, but their work lived on. Federation forces used their intelligence to win battle after battle. Human weapons designers built new guns based on HFY weaknesses the Marines had discovered. Human chemists made new poisons using Rodriguez's notes. The humans had turned their defeat into victory and their deaths into weapons. Zeftar began to understand that fighting humans was not about beating them in battle. It was about surviving the price they made you pay for that victory. The war was getting worse. More Federation worlds fell to the Zekai every week. The Insect Empire had too many ships and they were too fast. Federation Command tried different strategies, but nothing worked. Then Admiral Carlos Martinez came to the War Council with an idea that made everyone sick. Martinez was a thin man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had been fighting the Zekai for 2 years and had watched many of his friends die. When he spoke to the Federation leaders, his voice was calm, but his plan was insane. He called it the Ghost Fleet Operation. The idea was simple and horrible. Human volunteers would pilot ships that looked damaged and helpless. When Zekai forces came close to finish them off, the human ships would explode their reactor cores. Both the humans and the enemies would die, but the Federation would trade one ship for many enemy ships. The Thren generals were the first to speak against it. The Thren were a warrior race that had fought wars for thousands of years. Their leader, General Krath, stood up and said no honorable being would ask soldiers to die like this. He said it was murder disguised as tactics. Other species agreed. The peaceful Andrari said it violated every rule of civilized warfare. The logical Teclon ran calculations and said the plan would work, but was morally wrong. Even the aggressive, Vorhan said asking soldiers to die with no chance of survival was evil. But Admiral Martinez just nodded and said he understood their concerns. Then he asked if anyone had a better plan to stop the Zekai from killing billions of Federation citizens. Nobody answered because there was no better plan. Zeftar watched from the back of the room as Martinez explained the details. The volunteer ships would be modified to look like damaged vessels retreating from battle. Their reactor cores would be rigged with special bombs that could be triggered by the captain. When Zekai ships got close enough, the humans would detonate everything. The plan required volunteers who knew they would die. It required people willing to fly ships that were basically bombs with life support. It required a level of sacrifice that most species could not understand. Martinez said he would brief his people and see if anyone volunteered. The Federation leaders agreed to let him try, but they were sure no sane being would accept such a mission. They were wrong. 3 days later, Zeftar stood in the briefing room of the human ship Constitution. He wanted to see how humans would react to Martinez's plan. He expected anger or fear or refusal. What he saw instead haunted him for years. Commander Beth Palmer stood at the front of the room facing 200 human officers and crew members. She was a young woman with blonde hair and green eyes. She spoke in a clear, calm voice as she explained the Ghost Fleet mission. She told them the ships would be flying bombs. She told them there would be no rescue and no survival. She told them they would die alone in space with only the enemy for company. She explained every horrible detail of how they would spend their last hours. When she finished speaking, the room was quiet for exactly 10 seconds. Then every single person in the room raised their hand to volunteer. Zeftar felt his blood turn cold. These humans had just heard they were being asked to die, and they all said yes without even thinking about it. Palmer had to hold a lottery to choose who would get to sacrifice themselves because there were too many volunteers. Captain Danny Wright was chosen to lead the first ghost ship. He was a big man with brown hair and kind eyes, who had 3 children back on Earth. When Palmer told him he had been selected, he smiled and said it was an honor to serve. Zeftar followed the ghost ships as they prepared for their mission. He watched the crews work on their vessels, knowing they were building their own tombs. They painted fake damage on the hulls and rigged false distress signals. They loaded extra explosives and removed all the escape pods. The night before the mission, Zeftar found Wright in his quarters writing letters. Wright looked up and smiled when he saw the alien diplomat. He said he was writing to his children to explain why their father had to die. He was telling them about duty and sacrifice and protecting innocent people. Wright showed Zeftar pictures of his family. His wife Lisa was a teacher who worked with orphaned children. His son Kevin was 12 and wanted to be a scientist. His daughter Amy was 8 and loved to draw pictures of flowers. Wright talked about them like he would see them again tomorrow, even though he would be dead in a few hours. The next morning, 6 ghost ships left the Federation fleet. They flew toward a Zek-Hi patrol group and began transmitting distress signals. The enemy ships took the bait and moved in to destroy what they thought were helpless vessels. Zeftar watched from the command ship as the trap was sprung. When the Zek-Hi got close enough, Wright gave the signal, and 5 of the ghost ships exploded in balls of nuclear fire. 23 enemy vessels were destroyed instantly. The operation was a complete success, but Wright's ship did not explode. The Defiance had suffered real damage during the approach, and its detonation system was broken. Wright found himself facing 6 Zek-Hi ships, with no way to trigger his reactor bomb. Any sane person would have surrendered or tried to escape. Wright chose a different option. He ordered his 50 crew members to abandon ship in the few working escape pods. But Wright and 12 volunteers stayed behind to manually overload the reactor. It would take hours of dangerous work in the engine room while Zek-Hi soldiers boarded their ship. Zeftar listened to Wright's radio transmissions as the enemy boarding party cut through the hull. Wright calmly reported everything he saw about Zek-Hi equipment and tactics. He described their weapons and armor and how they moved through the ship. Even as his crew died around him, he kept sending intelligence reports. The Zek-Hi found Wright and his remaining men in the engine room trying to cause a reactor overload. The insects killed the humans one by one, but Wright kept working until his hands were burned black by radiation. His final transmission was a complete technical report about Zek-Hi boarding procedures, delivered in a steady voice as the ship's bulkheads melted around him. Wright succeeded in overloading the reactor. The Defiance exploded and took all 6 enemy ships with it. 50 humans had died, but they had eliminated 31 Zek-Hi vessels. More importantly, they had provided detailed intelligence about enemy boarding tactics that would save thousands of Federation lives. The Ghost Fleet operation continued for 6 months. Volunteers kept coming forward even as word spread about the horrible deaths that waited for them. Human ships pretended to be damaged or retreating and then exploded when enemies got close. The tactic destroyed over 300 Zek-Hi vessels. But what scared Zeftar was not the death toll. It was how the surviving humans talked about their dead comrades. They did not mourn or cry or get angry. They studied the battle recordings and figured out how to make the next ghost ships more effective. When Commander Palmer was killed in the 4th wave of attacks, her replacement, Lieutenant Frank Scott, changed the ship designs based on her final recommendations. When Captain Wright's sacrifice showed problems with the detonation system, human engineers built better bombs. Every death became a lesson, and every lesson made them more dangerous. The Zek-Hi began to fear any damaged human ship. They would destroy retreating vessels from long range rather than move close. This saved their ships, but it also meant they could not capture human technology or prisoners. The ghost ships had changed enemy behavior across the entire war zone. Zeftar realized that humans had found a way to make death itself into a weapon. Other species died in battle, and their knowledge died with them. But humans turned their deaths into tools that helped their species win. They did not just accept sacrifice. They made it productive. The Ghost Fleet operation finally ended when the Zek-Hi learned to avoid all human ships regardless of their condition. But by then the damage was done. Hundreds of enemy vessels were destroyed, and thousands of enemy soldiers had learned to fear human tactics. Most importantly, the humans had shown the Federation what total war really meant. It was not about brave soldiers dying for noble causes. It was about making sure your enemies paid such a high price for victory that they would think twice before fighting you again. The war had been going on for 4 years when the Zek-Hi decided to end it with one massive attack. They brought their entire 3rd Fleet to Proxima Centauri, which was humanity's first colony world outside Earth. Over 300 enemy ships surrounded the planet, like a metal storm cloud. The HFY commander sent a message saying humans would finally learn what happened to species that refused to bow to the Empire. General Frank Cooper commanded the ground forces on Proxima. He was an old soldier with white hair and scars across his face from previous battles. Admiral Nina Foster controlled the space defenses from orbit. She was younger with black hair and cold blue eyes that never seemed to blink. Together, they prepared to defend 10 million human colonists against the largest enemy force ever assembled. Zeftar watched the battle from a Federation monitoring station 3 light-years away. He expected to see a brave last stand followed by defeat. Human ships were outnumbered 5-1, and the ground forces faced certain death. Any reasonable commander would evacuate the civilians and retreat to fight another day. But humans were not reasonable. The first sign something was wrong came when the human ships did not try to run or hide. Instead, they moved into attack formation and broadcast a signal on all frequencies. It was children singing a lullaby about stars and dreams and going to sleep. Mixed with the sweet voices were the recorded death screams of HFY soldiers from previous battles. The psychological effect on the enemy was immediate. HFY communications became confused and angry. Some ships broke formation to attack the broadcasting vessels. Others hesitated, as if their crews were arguing about what to do. The humans had turned innocent children's voices into a weapon that disrupted enemy coordination. When the first HFY landing ships entered the atmosphere, they found that Proxima's mining colonies had been rigged with explosives. Entire mountains collapsed onto landing sites, crushing thousands of enemy soldiers. Rivers were dammed to flood valleys where HFY armies tried to establish bases. Even the weather had been weaponized as human engineers used atmospheric processors to create artificial storms over enemy positions. But the real horror began when HFY soldiers entered human cities. The colonists had not been evacuated. Instead, they had been turned into part of the defense. Children as young as 10 carried explosives disguised as toys. Elderly people pretended to surrender and then triggered grenades hidden in their clothes. Ordinary families booby-trapped their homes with poison gas and acid traps. Cooper had spent months preparing not just military defenses, but a complete psychological warfare campaign. Human voices broadcasting from hidden speakers told HFY soldiers about their families back home and how they would never see them again. Holographic projectors showed images of human children being tortured to enrage the enemy and make them careless. Even the city lights were programmed to flash in patterns that caused seizures in HFY nervous systems. The most horrible weapon was biological. Human scientists had captured HFY prisoners during previous battles and studied their bodies. They found that certain Earth bacteria could infect insect respiratory systems and cause a slow, painful death. The colonists released clouds of these bacteria into the air over every major city. HFY soldiers began dying from diseases their bodies had never encountered. They could not breathe properly, and their shells developed painful sores. Some went mad from fever and attacked their own troops. The bacteria spread through enemy camps faster than they could contain it. Admiral Foster coordinated the space battle with cold efficiency. When HFY ships moved to bombard population centers, she ordered human vessels to ram them at full speed. When enemy forces tried to land reinforcements, she directed orbital weapons to fire on her own cities rather than let them fall into enemy hands. The turning point came when Colonel Andy Mitchell's unit was surrounded in the ruins of New Angeles. 2,000 HFY soldiers had trapped 50 human Marines in the city center with no hope of escape. Any normal commander would order surrender to save his men's lives. Instead, Mitchell activated something humans called the Vengeance Protocol. Zeftar learned later that every human military unit carried a quantum beacon that could transmit precise tactical information instantly across any distance. Mitchell used his beacon to send the exact location and strength of every HFY force on the planet directly to the orbital fleet. Then he requested immediate nuclear bombardment of his own position. Foster did not hesitate. She ordered every human ship to target New Angeles with their most powerful weapons. Mitchell and his Marines would die, but so would 2,000 enemy soldiers. The exchange rate was acceptable. Zeftar watched in horror as nuclear fire rained down on human cities. Entire blocks vanished in balls of light and heat. The radiation levels became deadly across half the planet. Both human defenders and Zek-Hi invaders were vaporized instantly. But when the bombardment ended, something impossible happened. Human soldiers emerged from underground bunkers and kept fighting among the radioactive ruins. Cooper had prepared for this moment. Deep bunkers had been built under every major city, stocked with weapons and supplies for years of fighting. The nuclear bombardment had killed most of the Zek-Hi ground forces, but the humans had protected their core troops in radiation-proof shelters. The surviving colonists came out wearing radiation suits and carrying Geiger counters like they were normal equipment. Children who had been playing in radioactive ash helped soldiers set up new defensive positions. Elderly, people who should have died from radiation exposure instead, volunteered to carry ammunition to the front lines. The humans fought in conditions that would kill most species within hours. They breathed poisoned air and drank contaminated water and smiled while they did it. They had turned their own planet into a weapon against their enemies, and they lived in the ruins like it was their natural habitat. The Zek-Hi Third Fleet tried to retreat after losing 2/3 of their ground forces, but Foster would not let them leave. Human ships that had been hiding in asteroid fields and behind moons appeared and attacked the fleeing enemy vessels. The space battle continued for another week until only a handful of Zek-Hi ships escaped. When the fighting finally ended Proxima, Centauri was a radioactive wasteland that would be uninhabitable for decades. Over 3 million humans had died, including most of the original colonists. The planet's cities were ruins, and its atmosphere was poisoned with radiation and biological weapons. But the humans called it a victory. They had destroyed the largest enemy fleet ever assembled. They had killed over 500,000 Zek-Hi soldiers. Most importantly, they had shown the galaxy what happened to anyone who tried to conquer human worlds. The price of victory against humans was so high that it became indistinguishable from defeat. Cooper and Foster gave their final report standing, in the ruins of the planetary capital wearing radiation suits. They spoke calmly about casualty figures and tactical lessons learned. They discussed which weapons had worked best and which defensive strategies should be improved for next time. They did not mourn their dead cities or cry for their poisoned world. They analyzed the battle like scientists studying an experiment. They had turned total war into an exact science, and they were proud of their work. The battle recordings were transmitted across the galaxy. Every species saw what humans did when backed into a corner. They saw a people who would poison their own air and irradiate their own cities rather than accept defeat. They saw soldiers who called down nuclear fire on their own positions and then kept fighting in the radioactive ash. The Zek-Hi Empire began negotiating for peace 3 months later. They had won the battle for Proxima Centauri, but learned that conquering humans was impossible. The cost of defeating them was always higher than the value of what you gained. Zeftar realized that humans had redefined what victory meant. Other species fought to preserve their lives and homes and cultures. Humans fought to ensure that anyone who threatened them would regret it forever. They did not just wage war to win. They waged war to teach their enemies the true price of making them fight. 5 years had passed since the war ended. Zeftar sat in his small apartment on Thessia Prime, looking at 3 bottles of Kalani memory suppressants on his table. The blue liquid inside could erase the worst memories and let him sleep without nightmares. But he could not bring himself to drink them. The Galactic Council had asked him to write a report about human military capabilities. They wanted to know if humans should be given full Federation membership or if they were too dangerous to trust. They wanted facts and numbers and tactical assessments, but how could he explain what he had really seen? He tried writing the report many times. He started with statistics about human weapons and ship designs. He wrote about their tactics and strategies. He described their victory at Proxima Centauri and the defeat of the Zek-Hi Third Fleet. But the words felt empty and meaningless. Thea Okob. Real truth was not in the numbers. It was in the memories that woke him up every night screaming. He remembered Captain Ryan Torres flying his ship into an enemy dreadnought and taking 800 crew members with him. He remembered Sergeant Amy Rodriguez using a space station's life support systems to slowly torture thousands of enemy soldiers to death. He remembered Captain Danny Wright calmly reporting tactical data while his ship melted around him. But the memory that haunted him most was of Lieutenant Karen Bell. Bell had been the only survivor of the Titan Station massacre. Zeftar interviewed her 3 months after the battle ended. She was a thin young woman with brown hair and quiet gray eyes. She had held the station's reactor room alone for 8 hours against a full Zek-Hi assault battalion. The reactor room was the heart of the station. If it was damaged, the whole structure would lose power and thousands of people would die. Bell stayed at her post, manually controlling the cooling systems while enemy soldiers tried to break down the reinforced door. She knew the radiation would kill her slowly, but she also knew someone had to keep the reactor stable. When Zeftar asked why she did not surrender, Bell looked at him like he had asked a stupid question. She said someone had to keep the lights on for the next shift. She said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Bell died 2 weeks after the interview. The radiation had destroyed her body from the inside, but she lived long enough to write a complete technical manual about reactor maintenance during combat conditions. Her final gift to humanity was a guide for the next person who might have to die alone in a radiation-soaked engine room. Zeftar realized that this was what made humans truly terrifying. They did not fight because they were angry or scared or trying to protect themselves. They fought because they believed someone had to do the job and they were willing to be that someone. Other species saw war as a terrible thing that sometimes became necessary. Humans saw war as work that had to be done properly. They studied it and practiced it and improved their methods like craftsmen perfecting their art. They took pride in being good at killing their enemies efficiently. The Federation had rules about warfare. Civilians should be protected. Prisoners should be treated well. Weapons of mass destruction should only be used as a last resort. Cities should not be deliberately targeted. These rules existed to keep war from becoming too horrible. Humans followed the rules when it was convenient and ignored them when it was not. They used children as weapons and poisoned entire planets and called down nuclear fire on their own cities. They did whatever worked, and they felt no shame about it. The council members who asked for the report were old and wise beings who had seen many wars. They understood politics and diplomacy and the careful balance that kept different species from destroying each other. They thought they could control humans with laws and treaties and mutual agreements. But Zeftar knew they were wrong. You could not control a species that was willing to irradiate their own homeworld rather than accept defeat. You could not negotiate with people who turned their children into suicide bombers and their elderly into living weapons. You could not trust beings who saw every aspect of existence as a potential tool for warfare. The humans were not evil or cruel or sadistic. In peacetime, they were as kind and generous as any species in the Federation. They built hospitals and schools and art museums. They cared for their sick and educated their children and created beautiful music. They were capable of great love and compassion and sacrifice for noble causes. But when they went to war, they became something else entirely. They became a force of nature that consumed everything in its path. They became a machine designed for one purpose, which was making their enemies pay the highest possible price for fighting them. Zeftar finished his report as the sun set outside his window. He wrote that humans were tactically brilliant and strategically dangerous. He wrote that they learned fast and adapted quickly to new situations. He wrote that they were willing to accept casualties that would break other species, But then he added a personal note that violated every protocol he had learned in 3 centuries of diplomatic service. He wrote that humanity should never be the Federation's enemy, not because they could not be defeated, but because victory against them was meaningless. Humans did not fight to live. They fought to ensure their enemies could never forget the cost of making them fight at all. He wrote that he had seen humans turn defeat into victory and death into weapons. He had seen them poison planets and irradiate cities and sacrifice their own children for tactical advantages. He had seen them do horrible things with calm efficiency and call it necessary work. He wrote that other species fought wars to achieve goals like territory or resources or political power. Humans fought wars to teach their enemies lessons about the price of opposing them. They waged war not for what they could gain, but for what they could make their enemies lose. The most frightening thing about humans was not their weapons or their tactics or their willingness to die. It was their ability to make violence seem reasonable and necessary and even noble. They could convince themselves that any action was justified if it helped them win. They could turn mass murder into a moral duty and feel good about doing it. Zeftar sealed the report and sent it to the Galactic Council. Then he sat back down at his table and looked at the bottles of memory suppressants. The blue liquid promised peace and forgetfulness and dreamless sleep, but he did not drink it. Some things should not be forgotten. Someone needed to remember what humans were capable of when they decided to go to war. Someone needed to understand that the friendly faces and polite words and peaceful intentions could disappear in an instant when humans felt threatened. The Federation leaders would read his report and make their decisions about human membership. They would probably ignore his warnings and focus on the economic benefits of human technology and trade routes. They would think they could control humanity with politics and diplomacy. Zeftar hoped they were right. He hoped humans would remain peaceful members of the galactic community. He hoped the war with the Zekai had been an exception and not a preview of what humans could become. But he would keep the memory suppressants on his table as a reminder. Every night when the nightmares woke him up, he would look at the bottles and remember why he chose to keep the memories alive. Someone had to remember what happened when you made humans angry. Someone had to understand the true cost of fighting them. The humans had taught the galaxy a lesson about the price of war. Zeftar would make sure that lesson was never forgotten, even if it meant living with nightmares for the rest of his very long life. Outside his window, the stars shone peacefully in the night sky. Somewhere among those stars, humans were building new ships and training new soldiers and preparing for the next war that might come. They were getting ready to teach another lesson to anyone foolish enough to threaten them. Zeftar closed his eyes and tried to sleep, knowing the dreams would come again. In those dreams, he would see human faces calm and determined as they did terrible things for good reasons. He would hear human voices explaining why mass murder was necessary and justified and even noble. And in the morning, he would wake up and remember why the galaxy needed to understand what humans really were underneath their friendly smiles and peaceful words.